Would you like to hear Mike Pence push back on Donald Trump about his false claims that Pence had the right to overturn the election results?
No, I'm looking forward to hearing the former vice president speak about what real American leadership looks like.
But does the former vice president have a duty to push back against these false claims by the former president?
No, he's not. He's a private citizen. I don't think he has a duty to do that, no.
Shortly before, former Vice President Mike Pence took the stage at the Federalist Society Florida Chapters Conference in Orlando. Members weighed in on whether Pence should address the recent attacks from his former boss.
I don't know that this is the time or the place for that kind of conversation.
This week, the former President Donald Trump lied once again, saying Pence had the authority to reject the 2020 election results. So will Pence respond?
I think he's too much of a man with great demeanor and civility to address that openly in the public until it's the proper time.
Before Pence spoke, some here didn't see a need for Pence to address his decision to certify the vote because they agree Trump lost, period.
Joe Biden won the election, so I don't know what more I can say. I mean, Joe Biden won the election. The role of the vice president in that is very ceremonial. They counted the electoral ballots. The members of Congress voted to certify. Joe Biden won the election.
I don't think he needs to address it. What happened, right, wrong, or indifferent, we lost in 2020.
Do you not want to hear Pence correct the record that Trump is falsely claiming that he could have overturned the election?
I think Pence probably feels, I don't want to speak for Pence, but I think Pence probably feels that the record does not need to be corrected. Otherwise, he would correct it.
Then came the former vice president's speech.
And I heard this week that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone.
We went back out to the group after the speech to see how it was received.
I was pleasantly surprised with how he handled it. I thought he did a great job. I think it's time to move on from the 2020 election and look forward to 2024.
I think he's made it clear, the vice president has, that he has a difference of opinion with the president and the president's team over what the duties of the vice president required on January 6th.
Were you happy to hear him address it?
Well, I think he needed to address it. This is a great audience. These are constitutional scholars here, so you're speaking to a very educated group.
I think Mike Pence did the right thing. I think Mike Pence should have done what he felt was right, and it sounds like he did what he felt was right.
How do you think that comment will sit with former President Donald Trump being called wrong?
Probably not well, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what he says.
Randy joins us now from Orlando. So former Vice President Pence also talked about his hope for Republicans to win the White House in 2024 today. Do the people you spoke with want to see Pence run for president?
Anderson, everyone we spoke with said they do think that Mike Pence should run for president. They spoke very highly of his character. That seems to be a big draw for them. But remember, this is Florida, and this was the Florida chapter of the Federalist Society. So, of course, a lot of people there also saying they'd like to see Florida Governor Ron DeSantis jump into the race for the White House as well. But regarding Pence, everyone there said that they were very happy to see him standing up to Donald Trump. They do think that the two men will figure out their differences at some point and put on a united front for the party, which folks told us is very important, of course. But what's key here is that even if Donald Trump makes a play for the White House again, most everyone we spoke with said that that should not hold Mike Pence back. They think he should still jump into the race, Anderson.
Randy Kay, appreciate it. Let's get perspective now from Democratic strategist Paul Begala, also CNN political commentator Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush. Paul, I just want to play what former Vice President Pence said today again to listen for the viewers.
January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. Lives were lost, and many were injured. But thanks to the courageous action of the Capitol Police and federal law enforcement, the violence was quelled, the Capitol was secured, and we reconvened the Congress that very same day to finish our work under the Constitution of the United States and the laws of this country.
What do you make, Paul, of what Pence said and the response?
Well, it's the Federalist Society claims to be committed to, these are their words, I looked up their website, the principles of limited government embodied in our Constitution. Well, the Constitution is absolutely clear. The woman Randy interviewed was clearly right. The vice president is only ministerial. He just has a ceremonial job at the counting of the electoral votes. It's not in question. It's as if Neil deGrasse Tyson were speaking to a group of astrophysicists, and he said, Donald Trump is wrong. The moon is not made of green cheese. It's made of rock. And they went, yeah, I'm not sure. It's preposterous and it's insulting. I'm glad Randy found some principled constitutionalists there. They claim to all be. But I was really disappointed, frankly, that they didn't carry him around on their shoulders for saving the Constitution, because that's what that whole group claims to be about. And I'm beginning to wonder if they really are.
Scott, do you think the former vice president made the right call, publicly rebuking the former president, or at least just saying he was wrong? Did he have a choice?
I do, actually. Yeah, I think he made first of all, his speech was terrific today. His words were terrific. His actions on January the 6th were right on and in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of America and what happened on Election Day. So he's played this correctly, I think, all the way through. As a political matter, this is the campaign Mike Pence is going to have to run. He's obviously running. Donald Trump, I think, is obviously running. And Mike Pence and Donald Trump are going to have a great debate about whether the Republican Party is going to see it the way Donald Trump did or the way Mike Pence did. And so I would look at this speech today, frankly, as something of a kickoff of that debate. I assume Trump will have something to say when he finally hears the Pence clip. But this is what he and I assume Governor Chris Christie, who looks like he's running as well, are going to argue. And it's essentially this. I stood by Donald Trump every step of the way, but come January 6th, we had to part ways because the Constitution mandated it. And that's where we are as a party. So I thought Pence was great today, and I'm glad he gave the speech that he did.
Paul, I mean, we've seen this back and forth between Trump and Pence this week. The ball, I guess, is now in Trump's court, if you want to use that analogy. Does Pence, I mean, in this Republican Party, do you think Pence has a shot?
Look, I defer to Scott. He knows his party far better than I do. But I would note that a year ago, 3 or 4 weeks after the insurrection, Mike Pence, who I don't agree with politically, but I know him. I've known him a long time. He has profound and deep and abiding Christian faith. And he went to a Christian conservative group called the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and he was booed. And one guy yelled out, "Traitor!" Now, if the Christians prefer Donald Trump, who can't name a single book in the Bible, to Mike Pence, I think that tells you something. If the constitutionalists are at best very lukewarm and kind of silent in support of the guy who help save the Constitution, and instead for the insurrectionists. In other words, I think it looks like a rout. I think the people who should be most committed to Mike Pence seem to not be backing him at all. I think Trump has so perverted and polluted the Republican Party that it may be beyond salvation.
Scott, I'm wondering what you made of the official RNC resolution censuring Adam Kinzinger, Congressman Kinzinger and Congresswoman Cheney, and the talk of legitimate political discourse that claiming that the January 6th committee is going after ordinary Americans who were just engaged in legitimate political discourse.
Well, here we are sitting in the greatest political environment of my, adulthood for Republicans in terms of trying to take back the House and the Senate in November, and really, I think, heading towards 2024. And we have all these issues and all these amazing things to talk about. And here at the RNC, which I've been a delegate to the last several conventions, I'm a proud Republican and will be voting Republican, I'm sure, in the future and have in my life. Here we are today changing the conversation. Let's relitigate January 6th. Let's tell people they didn't see what they really saw on TV. Let's relitigate the November 2020 election. This is a recipe for failure. We have all of this amazing environment, all of these issues, all of this forward-looking that we could be doing. By the way, this is a party that could not be bothered to write a platform in 2020. And now we've spent more time writing this resolution than we spent on writing a policy platform in the last presidential election. It is not legitimate political
Scott, when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous.
Crash into the Capitol. It sounds ridiculous because it is ridiculous. You cannot crash the Capitol, defile the House and the Senate, and attack the police. That's not legitimate. Now, I know Chairwoman McDaniel put out a statement later saying there's a difference between the people who were protesting versus the rioters at the Capitol. That's not what the resolution says. And if that's what they meant, that's what they should have put in there. So this is an unforced error that hurts the Republican Party in its attempt to get back into power, and it's deeply, deeply disappointing that it happened today. This phrase, legitimate political discourse, will be hung around every candidate's neck for the next 2 cycles.